Okay, so we are talking about the 4 Ps of negotiation. Now, there's an awful lot more that goes into negotiation than just the 4 Ps, but I thought it was a nice, snappy title to give it. So that's what we're talking about today. So for those of you who don't know who are consulting that well, we're a sales consulting organization that helps anyone working in sales to improve their performance through training and coaching so that they can hopefully win more deals and generate more revenue. We do that through I have a variety of online training, public training, and private training for people. And everything that I do is based on the equation of sales. The equation of sales simply states that trust times needs times value equals successful selling. So in order to be successful, you have to build trust with your customer. You have to understand what they need and then demonstrate that whatever it is that you're selling delivers value to them. If you can do those three things, then generally you are going to be successful. Okay. So just as an introduction, we'll just go through what some general things about negotiation, and then we'll go through the 4Ps. So what is negotiation, right? So negotiation is the process of movement to reach an agreement that is fair to both sides. Now, there are various words in there that are important. Process, one of our 4Ps. So it is a series of things that have to happen. Movement means that both sides are going to move from their original position. You wouldn't be negotiating if there wasn't a difference between you, right? You then reach agreement, which means that both sides are in agreement and that both sides are happy with what has resulted, right? Which means that it's fair to both sides. The last thing you ever want to do, particularly in a sales arena, is to reach an agreement that is not fair to both sides. Because at some point after that, one or other side is going to be unhappy with it all and is not actually, they either won't come and buy more from you, or they're not going to do a good job in implementing whatever it is that they've bought has been bought because of it. So it's got to be fair in order for it to be successful to both sides. Right? What is it not? Okay. So there's a lot of people who will try to impose on a negotiation, and it results in a poor deal in the end. So we need to try and avoid things like deadlock, where both sides are too far apart to reach an agreement, or dominance, where one party is not allowed to reach its objectives. So one party is totally saying, this is what I want, and not letting the other side have anything, which leads to the insistence. So give and take is required. You cannot sit there and go, no, it's only my position that will be considered, because that's not fair to both sides. We cannot manipulate the other side, so we should reach agreement through agreeing rather than it being forced upon us. It's not problem solving, right? So you don't have the same objectives. You both want a deal, but you're not trying to solve the same problem. And it should not be win at all costs. There are some people for whom any deal, they feel they have to win, and that's not a good way of going about it, okay? Golden rule of negotiation is that people will not negotiate with you unless they believe that you can help them or hurt them, okay? So in the sales area, I always, as far as I'm concerned, if someone starts to negotiate with me, I'm happy, right? It means that they want to buy the product that I've got. They're never going to go and bother negotiating with me if they don't want what it is that I've got, right? They're not going to waste their time going through agreements and all these sorts of things if they don't want to buy. So if someone starts negotiating with you, it's the best buying signal that you can get. And it starts, you then start to have a different mindset, I think, as to what it is that you're trying to do. You stop trying to sell and you start trying to construct a deal that both sides are happy with. Okay, so that's the introductions. Let's go through our 4Ps, right? So we'll start with process. As I say, negotiation is a process where both sides move, and there are various stages involved in that process. So this is it, right? So preparation at the start, and that's obviously one of the other 4Ps. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. Discussion, clarification, negotiation, and agreement. Okay, so they're the 5 stages of the process, and we'll talk about each one of those as we go along. It is worth saying at the start of this, before we get into that, when we first start a negotiation, we are more likely to be successful if we like the people that we are negotiating with. So now that's, in the current circumstances in the world, between the Ukrainians and the Russians, that might be a tricky thing to get, right? It may be difficult for them to like. But if we're going to work in sales, if we can build rapport with the people that we're dealing with, we are going to be more successful. So there was a Harvard Business School experiment where they asked groups of people to negotiate, and half the teams were asked to just get a deal done as quickly as they could, and the other half were asked to find something that was in common between the members of the teams before they started negotiating. So to start to build a rapport with each other. The group that went straight into it, only 50% of the deals got done. And in the group where they found things in common before they started, 90% of the deals got done, right? So if we like each other, the chances are we're going to be more successful in our negotiating. So it's really important that when we go into it, we start by building some rapport with the other side, all right? So the first stage, when we actually sit down with each other, we're going to have some discussions. So we maybe need to set some rules. We maybe need to set some time frames. We'll agree when we're going to do things. We might need to agree some parameters for the negotiation. What is it that we're actually going to negotiate about, depending on how complicated it is. You might need both sides to set out their case, right? So this is what it is that we decide, this is what our point of view is, and the other side presents their point of view. And then maybe there are a bunch of things that you agree on, right? So if you agree on things, then it's much easier for you to then park those and move on and discuss the things that you're not agreeing on. All right. We then need to go on to clarification, right? Do you all understand the same things about what it is that's going on, right? Are you using the same words, meaning the same things? Quite often, we all have our own wording for various things, or we call things certain things. We need to make sure that everybody understands those things. We might want to use it to define our goals and interests, right? We might need to explain why we've constructed the deal in the way that we have. There may be some things that you cannot agree to, right? And it's worth laying those out. It always, in any negotiation I've ever had, if I've got something that I have to do, right, you lay it out to the customer and you explain why that is the case. And inevitably, they will almost always accept that, right? Because once you've explained it, they'll be able to understand it. And so that helps in what it is that's going on, okay? Then we start to negotiate, right? So negotiation itself is only the 4th stage of the process. And this is where we start to trade variables. So what are the different things that we can give? So I need to get this off the customer and I need to give something back in return. What are those things that we're going to do? How are we going to trade them? Are we trading things that are of equal value? All right. They can be difficult at times, depending on how easy it is for you to move. Right. Sometimes you might want to have informal discussions on the side, take someone aside and say, look, here's the position with me, right? Have a set side discussion that actually helps move things forward. And potentially you might want to take time out. If things start to get a little bit difficult, then sometimes you need to take some time to go and rethink, to go and reassess, and maybe go back a stage in the process. There's no harm in going back if you want to try and get the deal. And then finally, we get to agreement. And as I say, both sides must agree. Otherwise, it's not a deal. And it's better to temporarily halt rather than fail to agree. And as I say, if you do halt it, again, it may be necessary to go back a number of stages. And the agreement needs to be win-win, right? It's not If it's only one side who are happy with it, then it's not a great deal, and everyone has got to be happy with it. Okay. Any questions or comments on any of the process that I've talked about? No. Okay. So we'll move on to preparation. Okay. So as the saying goes, if you fail to prepare, you should prepare to fail. And I think in the negotiation, the more preparation you do, the better the outcome is going to be for you. The more that you understand about the customer's position, the easier it is going to be for you to come to a satisfactory agreement. Okay, so our preparation consists of 5 things, right? Our objectives, the variables, our strengths, weaknesses, and the best alternative. What are we going to do, and what is the other side going to do if we can't come to an agreement? Okay, so we'll talk about all of those things as we go through. Okay, so the objectives, right? What do you want to achieve from the negotiation? Okay, now we'll take it for granted that you want a deal, right? If we're selling something, we want to have a deal, right? But there may be more to it than that, right? So if you're selling a brand new product, right, your first customer is really, really important, because that's a validation that your product is actually worth having. And so getting that first deal, you may be prepared to give up a lot more than you might do by the time you get to your 100th deal, right? So we've got a different objective in that first deal than we have in all the subsequent ones. It's also important that we think about what the other side's objectives are. What do they want to get out of the deal? Because if you can understand those, again, you can start to use that in your negotiation, and you can understand more about why they may ask for certain things and why certain things may be important to them. Particularly if you know that the customer is desperate for the product. They're going to go bankrupt if they don't get it in a most dramatic of circumstances, right? That leaves you 2 alternatives in those circumstances, because you know that their backs are against the wall and they'll almost do anything for the deal. But if you can actually get them through the deal in a nice way, then you potentially have a much better customer going forward. So again, understanding what's driving the customer is really important. Okay. You may not know it specifically. You may not know everything about what their objectives are, but the more that you know, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to construct a deal. Right. Now, one pie or many pies. So this is where we look at our variables, right? So the variables are all the different things that go into the deal, right? It is no deal is ever just here's a product and here's a price, and one thing goes with the other and there are no discussions. Or at least if they are, that's a great deal if you can get it, but generally it doesn't happen. There are always more things that you can consider, right? Because the issue with the one pie is that if you've only got one pie and you need to split it between 2 people, the only fair way to do it is down the middle, such that both sides get half each, right? If you've got multiple pies, you can divide them up differently, which is what the pies on the right are trying to demonstrate. Because you can divide them up differently, sometimes you might get more of one and less of another. So you may get more of the things that you want, and the other side may get more of the things that they want from their pies. So trying to bring in more variables is going to help the discussions, because you've got more things that you can then trade. And as I say, negotiation is all about trading variables. So the more things that you can bring in, the easier it is going to be. All right. If you want to shut a negotiation down, you absolutely limit the number of variables. So you could turn around and say, well, the only things that can vary are the price and when you sign a deal, right? And I might drop the price in order for you to sign the deal quicker than you might otherwise want to. But they're the only things that can vary. And in which case, it's a simple trade-off between one and the other. And that might be fine, right? But in any more complicated deals where there's lots of moving parts, the more variables you have, the more likely it is that you can come to a satisfactory agreement. So when we start to trade variables, we need to think about what's valuable to you and what's valuable to the buyer, right? So not everything is valuable to you and not everything is valuable to the buyer, right? So for example, if this is the first time you've sold the product, getting a reference case, so getting the customer to agree to say, yeah, I've bought the product, it's been really useful, that's really quite valuable to you because it's proof to other customers that you can deliver this product and do it, right? Is it particularly valuable to the customer? Not really. They don't get an awful lot out of it. They maybe get a little bit of kudos, or they may get some extra publicity, but it's not as valuable to them as it is to you. So you've got to think of all the variables that I've got, where can I plot them on this chart? What's valuable to me and what's valuable to the other side, right? And then we sort of can divide it up into 4 quadrants, and things that are either invaluable to both sides or valuable to both sides, we need to trade within the box, right? So something that's valuable to the seller needs to be traded for something that's valuable to the buyer, right? If it's both, so if they're both valuable to both of you, you need to be trading in there, right? In the on the opposite side, right? So if it's something that's valuable to you but not so valuable to the buyer, you need to trade it for something that's valuable to the buyer but not so valuable to the seller, right? So you've got to always think, if you don't do this part of the preparation, if you don't think of what all your variables are, you may end up giving away something that's not valuable to you in return that's something that's very valuable to the customer, right? And that's not a good deal in the end, right? So you've got to be trying to be trading for things that are valuable to both sides, okay? So you want to also think about your strengths and weaknesses, right? So what's unique about what it is that you're offering? What can they get from anyone, right? So at the end of the day, your customer is buying your product because of what's unique about it, right? So if you understand what it is, then that allows you to bring that strength to it. If there's lots of things that they can buy from anybody, right? Why are they buying it from you? How can you mitigate? Effectively, that's a weakness, and how can you mitigate that in that process, okay? So again, they're things that you need to think about in advance. Right, so then the next thing is the best alternative, okay? So what is going to happen if we cannot get a deal, right? Now, from the sales perspective, unless you've got a finite resource, which is unusual for most of us, we just don't get a deal, right? Well, that's not anything that we ever want. We always want to be able to get the deal, right? But there may be circumstances where we have to walk away, right? If the customer is just asking for too much, if they're pricing it, they're going to want to drive the price too low, or they're not nice to work with, or whatever it is there something that's going to make us walk away? But for us, it's it's either deal or no deal, right? For the customer, it's quite different because they've got a problem they want to solve, and they're still going to have that problem if they don't buy our product, right? They are still going to have to do something, right? So what is it they're going to do if they can't do a deal with you, right? So obviously the customer has got a better idea of what that's going to be, but you really need to be thinking about what that is for the customer, because that then allows you to start to pitch where your opening offer is going to be. So the concept is called a BATNA, which stands for Best Alternative to No Agreement. And it's another thing that comes out of Harvard Business School. So what is it that you're going to do if you can't get a deal, right? And it basically stops you from accepting a bad deal and rejecting a good deal, right? And if we think about the deal as a range, right? So somewhere along this line, we can do a deal, right? And at the top end, it's a better deal for the sales, and at the bottom end, it's a better deal for the customer. And towards the top of there, then, the better deal for sales, the customer's going to walk away because you're either asking for too much or not delivering enough, whatever it is. And at some point towards the bottom, sales is going to walk away, right? And the area in the middle is the zone of potential agreement, okay? So if we are going to start the negotiation, we want to try and pitch, from the sales perspective, we want to pitch our deal close to the customer walkaway position, maybe not right on it, but we want to be able to pitch it fairly close to there so that we've got room to move as we start to negotiate, right? If you pitch it nearer the middle, right, and you have to move, you're moving closer and closer to the position where you've got to walk away and you can't do a deal. So you need to try and pitch it reasonably towards the end of the zone of potential agreements and then start to move towards the middle if you can, right? So understanding what the alternatives are for both sides is really important, okay? So for sales, how low are you going to go before the deal is not worth doing? Is there a price that you just cannot accept, right? The chances are there's almost no price that you can't accept, but it just doesn't do you any good if you accept a really, really low price, particularly with that customer, because they'll keep asking for that low price, and you can't afford to keep delivering at a low price, right? For the customer, what are they going to do? How are they going to solve their problem if it's not going to do it with your product? All right. So we always have to think, what are they going to do? What is the impact for them if they cannot do this deal, right? And it will help to inform you. And you can either be strong in the negotiations or give a little more, depending on how you view that walkaway position. The other thing is also to think about the alternatives for the other party, right? As I say, what are they going to do, right? So there's a great story of a farmer on the Mississippi. So he owned land that bordered the Mississippi River. And he came, or a real estate agent came to visit him one day and said, I've got a client who'd like to buy some of your land on the river. How much would you sell it for? And the farmer sort of said, well, you need to give me time to think about it. So he went away and did a lot of analysis and came back with the idea that this land was worth probably about $3 million as farming land. So the real estate agent came back and offered him $8 million for this land. And the farmer basically said, yes, that's fine, I'll do that deal, right? Because in his head, the land was only worth $3 million. Now, it turns out that the real estate agent was buying it for a bunch of hotel owners who wanted to park paddle boats outside and build casinos and hotels on the land. And to them, that land was worth an awful lot more because they weren't using it for farming they were using it for alternative uses. So thinking about the alternatives for the other party is really important so that you are fully aware of what their position are, what else they can do, what else might they be going to do as a result of doing this deal. And that allows you to decide what the best price is, okay? Any questions about preparation before we move on to pricing? Okay, so pricing is probably the most emotive element of any negotiation. It's the one thing that, whilst the price is a very logical thing in many respects, our reactions to it are generally quite emotive, and so we have to be very careful when we talk about price with people. Now, one of the things that I fairly believe is that most customers have a fair idea what a reasonable price is. So if you think about going to buy a pair of shoes, you kind of know, well, shoes cost maybe £50, maybe £100 for a standard pair of shoes. If you walked into a standard shoe shop on the high street and they asked you £2,000 for a pair of shoes, you'd probably be walking out again thinking that's not a fair price. And in most cases, customers have a fair idea what a reasonable price is. They know what similar sorts of products do or similar services cost. And so they have a fair idea what a reasonable price is. So trying to sort of come up with things that are entirely out with that, right, is very, very difficult. So you're immediately sort of constrained by their ideas. And we'll touch on how you might unconstrain those at the end. Okay. Now, there's a whole bunch of pricing strategies that you could use. You know, an enormous number of types of things that you can talk about. I'm not going to talk about all of those because it very much depends on what it is that you're selling as to how you go about deciding on your pricing. And there's an awful lot of other people who will talk about that. There are some interesting psychological things about pricing, though, that I think are worth talking about. So, for example, the 1 pence difference between £3.80 and £3.79 doesn't matter, but it does between £3 and £2.99, because we look at that first number and that anchors our understanding of what the price is. So £2.99 seems an awful lot less than £3. And I know that's sort of ridiculous, but that's the way it is. £185 sounds bigger than £200 because it takes longer to say it. Right? It's again, doesn't seem obvious, but effectively it sounds bigger. It's always worth separating shipping and handling fees from prices, or, you know, anytime you buy anything on the internet, that will always be separated. If you've got, you know, expenses in a deal, right, they get separated out. There are times when I quote for work to do, and, you know, my expenses are probably another 25% on the cost of the overall project. And it always strikes me as people don't really take that into account, but it's still a large amount of money in the overall thing. If people are worried about a price, offering payment in installments makes a big difference. So all of a sudden, you know, if they're going to pay over 3 months, they're only looking at a third of the price. And again, psychologically, that makes it feel easier. Again, if people are looking at something that feels expensive, reframing it into either a price per day or a price per month, or comparing it to something cheap, always is a useful way of doing it. So a lot of time when people are talking about subscription services, you can say, well, it's only so much per day, you know, and that's less than the cost of a cup of coffee. And so all of a sudden it feels like it's very cheap in comparison to what the actual total amount of money is. And there's a couple of things around rounded prices versus specific prices. I've always, for a long time, thought I like rounded prices. It just seems like the right thing to do. But actually, people are prepared to pay more for very specific prices, right? And that's because our logical brain kicks in and says, well, clearly they've put some thought into what this price is, and they've calculated it in a certain way, and it comes out at that amount of money. Whereas a nice round amount of money just feels like it's probably been rounded, and the chances are people have rounded it up rather than rounded it down. And so it feels like it doesn't feel right. Okay. Again, for our logical and emotional brains, for logical purchases, things that we have to have, right, very precise prices make more sense. Whereas for emotional purchases, rounded prices make more sense because our brain absorbs them easier. Okay. If you're listing a whole bunch of items, it's better to list them from the highest price to the lowest price, particularly if the customer has the choice as to what it is that they take. The chances are when you present someone with a list, they will start to go down it and they will stop at some point and they will eliminate what's at the bottom, right? So if your highest price items are at the bottom, that's what's being eliminated. And obviously you don't want that if you can help it, okay? For large order numbers, try listing the number before the price. So again, it makes the price per widget seem an awful lot less because it comes second, okay? Also, if you offer different versions of your product, right? If you've got an online version and a physical version, you can have a difference in price between them, right? Or you can turn around and say, well, actually, both together costs the same as the physical version, right? And then the customer feels like they're getting a deal. But the reality is, the online version doesn't cost anything for you to deliver, so it doesn't really make that much difference whether it's both together, right? So you're actually persuading people to buy the more expensive item by bundling those things together. Okay. Where possible, customers should pay before they use, right? Nice to do, but almost impossible in most business-to-business environments. Avoid bundling expensive and inexpensive products, unless it's obviously the same version of the same thing. It's different. When you put an inexpensive product with an expensive product, the value of the inexpensive one is not appreciated, right? So people tend not to use it or think that it's not been worth it because it was all bundled together, right? If you've got two similar products, then sure, there's a price difference, because otherwise people can't tell what if there's a difference between the products, there's got to be a difference between the prices, because otherwise they cannot understand the value of the difference between the products. And then lastly, always increase prices by small amounts over short periods. If you never increase your prices for a long time and then all of a sudden you need to increase them, you've got to increase them by a large amount. Whereas if you increase them by small amounts over short periods, people don't tend to notice the prices going up, whereas they obviously would do if it was a really significantly large amount. Okay. And then the last thing about pricing is about anchoring bias, in that we judge something by the first information that we hear. And in terms of pricing, that's really quite important, because the first price that we hear means that we then decide that's what the price is. And if the price goes up, then we feel like it's a bad deal. And if the price comes down, then it feels like it's a good deal. So for example, if you were looking to buy a secondhand car and you looked online and you saw that the price was £10,000, if you then turned up at the showroom and in fact the sticker price was £9,000, it's less than the first price you heard. And so all of a sudden you think you're getting a deal, right? It feels like it's better. Whereas if you do it the other way around, if you saw the online price as £9,000 and you turned up in the showroom and it was £10,000, doesn't feel anything like as good. It certainly doesn't feel good. You feel like you're being ripped off because we've decided that the price is £9,000. So if you're selling anything to anybody, always give them what the highest price you would ever charge them is. So if you have a price list, you tell them what the list price is. If they don't want to negotiate with you on the price, you've got the ability to come down, and it feels like they're getting a good deal because they're coming down from that first price. So it's always useful in any time that you're dealing with customers to get the price out there fairly early, right? First of all, it allows the customer to decide whether they've got the budget to buy it or not. But secondly, it gives them that anchor as to where the price is going to be pitched, and it potentially gives you that room to move and make them feel like they've got a good deal. Okay. Any questions about pricing before we move on?
Yeah, I actually have a price. I'm Wendy from Westwood Global Energy.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi. For instance, we've got the anchor price, right? And you do give good deals. You give a 10%, 15, 25% discount, depending on your relationship with the client. And then, you try not to get them all the way up to list price. But if they do hit list price, and then you've got your executive saying, okay, you need to get some movement on their rate, even though they're at the top, and you haven't had any significant changes to the product in several years, but you keep increasing them, 5% each year. there's some animosity there.
Hmm.
You're trying to justify why, you're being told you've got to get some movement. They're already hitting, the price that they think they should be paying. Anything past that's going to be painful for them. How do you justify that increase, even if it's 5% on an annual basis, and you don't have a change in the product?
Yes. So this is something that they're paying on subscription, isn't it?
Yeah, we are a
Yeah.
subscription-based company,
So,
correct?
so that is a far more difficult one. So when I talked about increasing the price, it's sort of more you're buying things on a one-off basis, or you buy one today and I'll buy another
Right.
one in 3 months' time or 6 months' time or whatever. It is very difficult on a subscription basis unless you have written it into the agreement.
Yeah.
So if you've had to discount it from the list price down to get the deal in the first place, I would be, one of the things that you can negotiate. It's that they're the variables that are in there.
Okay.
And that's why I say you've got to think of all the different variables that you've got. So yes, you've got the starting price, but you could say, well, sign a deal for 3 years at this price or whatever, or you could say, let's sign a deal such that the price goes up 5% every year.
Okay.
And explain why, because it's not at list price. They are getting a good deal to start with. I think you've got that explanation is quite important. And it's obviously made more complicated if you're then dealing with different people in subsequent years for renewals.
Right.
Which is why it's worth having all those things documented if you can, because you can then go back and say, here's what we agreed or whatever, and here's what you got, and here's why you got it.
So you've got to set that expectation on the go instead. Yeah, because that's all often the point of contention with the client is having to pay a small increase every year to get them where it should be at list price, right?
Yes. Okay. And that's the issue with discounting effectively, is that you've then got to have that problem. You've got that problem of getting them back to list price.
Okay.
I had to deal with a customer once where we had discounted a service by 50% to get the deal on the first year. And so I came in a couple of years later and I was told, you've got to get it up to 100%, and that was not an easy one for them to swallow. But it is a difficult, it is a problem caused by discounting at the start. So, the way to avoid it is to not discount at the start if you can. But if you are, if you're forced into that position, try to build that increase into subsequent renewals in the agreement.
Okay.
Can
I ask you your opinion, Tim? I was was going to book a dinner at a local arts centre, which is a not-for-profit organisation. It's their sort of first event, and they're doing a 3-course dinner. And in the price of that, you're making a donation to it. And I was going to book 2 tickets without even looking at the details, because I thought I really wanted to support it. And then I looked at the detail, and the cost per person was £110. And it didn't tell you how much that was donating and how much was for the dinner. And I just wondered what you thought, because I just didn't continue. I just thought that's £210 for a 3-course meal for 2 of us, which is way over what I would ever expect to spend, even though you're donating some money. I just wonder what you thought about that. How would you play that one?
Yeah, no, I think you've got to make it clear how much the donation is in there, because if it's a £20 meal and a £90 donation, it sets your expectation as to what the food is going to be like. If it's a £50 meal and a £60 donation, then it's a different expectation. And you've got to decide, how much am I prepared? You may be prepared to pay £70-80 for a meal, but maybe not give £90 as a donation. So I think you've got to be clear in those circumstances. And that's like the shipping and the price of the product, separating them. You can say it's an all-in-one price, but you should be making it clear how much is an actual donation.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, no worries. Okay. All right. So last P then is procurement. So from the sales perspective, we are always having to deal with someone on the other side who is buying, and they may not be the ultimate user of the product. They may not be the actual economic buyer. They're just somebody put in place to actually do the negotiation with you. And as such, they may not understand the value of the product in the same way that the actual buyer does. And that can make things difficult. But actually, it's the way they view you and your product that may also make things difficult. So the procurement matrix is a concept that comes from another Harvard Business School article, and the Kralik portfolio purchasing model. I say it came out of the Harvard Business Review, and it is used by a lot of companies to understand how they should go about buying things that are essential to their business. Okay, so it helps for you to understand, to have done some of the analysis, because it's quite probable that the people that you're dealing with have done it and they understand the importance or not of your product to their business, and therefore it's important that you understand how they're therefore going to treat you. So the overall model involves 4 steps. So the purchase classification, which is what we're going to talk about, based on that classification, you then go out and look at who are the companies that can sell these products to us, how are we going to deal with each of them, and then put those things into place. So 2, 3, and 4 are very much part of procurement and are not really relevant to us. It's the purchase classification that we want to look at, okay? So in essence, what we do is we classify, or the purchasers will classify all the things that they're going to buy based on the supply risk and the profit impact, right? So the supply risk is, how difficult is it to buy this particular item? So for example, white envelopes, very easy to buy, no risk. Even if they're important to our business, we're going to be able to get them really easily. Computer chips today, very much a supply risk. They are actually really difficult to get. So, you know, PlayStation 5s have been difficult to buy. Cars have got up to a year's worth of delay between ordering and receiving, or because of computer chips. So there is a big supply risk around those. Then the profit impact is, how does this product and its price impact our profits? So if it has a significant value to the output, then it's going to have an impact on it. So energy prices, for example, for a high manufacturing organization, the price of energy is going to have a profit impact, right? So that's the way we have to think about all of these things, okay? So we then have a matrix of things that have a high profit, we look at the profit impact and plot it against the supply risk. And then we can divide those into 4, and we have these 4 different items, and we behave differently with each one of them, okay? So the strategic items have a high profit impact and a high supply risk. So these are the most important things that you're going to buy, okay? So they might be difficult to get hold of, and a variation in the price can have a big impact on your profits, right? So you want to then go and say, okay, I need to put into place long-term agreements. I need to try and fix the price as much as I can. So the way I'll go about buying those things will be judged by those things, right? Leverage items have a high profit impact, low supply risk. So they're easy to get hold of. So energy, for example, fairly straightforward to get hold of, but can have a high profit impact. So again, we're going to maybe put in long-term agreements to try and fix our prices as much as possible. Bottleneck items, low profit impact, but can be difficult to get hold of. And therefore, we want to maybe to guarantee supply far more than anything else. And then non-critical items, low profit impact, low supply risk. You know, we can just have, you know, very straightforward buying processes for them. So what's important for you in sales to do is to think about all the things that your customer is buying. You can't think of absolutely everything they're buying, but think about what it is that they're buying from you, and think about all the similar things that they're buying that they might think about. And where are you going to fall in that matrix, right? So what is, can they get these things from anyone else? Are you going to make that much of a difference to their overall business, right? Think, where do you fall within this chart, right? Once you understand where that is, you're going to understand how your customer is going to want to buy from you, right? So if you fall in the bottleneck items, the customer is going to be looking for those long-term agreements or guaranteed supplies and such like, and therefore that's what's going to be important to them. That's going to be their objectives when we come to do the negotiation. And if you understand that, you can therefore start to think, how am I going to react to that as a result? Okay.